I'm Steve Johnson, News Director for theDove TV. Check out our other videos and visit our website at thedove.us. Thanks.
Welcome to Focus Today. I'm your host, Perry Atkinson, and we're continuing on with a great series that's being offered to the community. It's called the COHO series, and it's a lecture series dealing with life and death and living well until you die, and all the issues that surround that, and to make sure that you are properly prepared for that, your family is, and it really is a remarkable service. And it'll be a lecture series that's held on this coming Thursday twice. The same thing is repeated, so you can get it at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's free at the Smullen Center there, across the parking lot at Rogue Valley Medical Center, or again in the evening at 7 o'clock. Delighted to have with us Dr. Paul Rostykus with us, and we're going to be talking to him about emergency services and some other things. Doctor, nice to have you. And you've been involved in this for quite some time, haven't you? In emergency services. How many years?
It's better than 20 years. I've kind of lost track of exactly how long it is, but as the EMS medical director here in the county.
Well, thank you for your service for all those years. Let's talk about 911, because a lot of people dial it for frivolous things, but when should somebody call 911?
Well, call 911. It's the emergency. Technically, it's called the Public Service Answering Point. PSAP is one of the many names for it, but 911 is the number in the United States. And it's the number for getting emergency services when you need something right now. Okay. So, you know, the typical we think about is fire, law enforcement, EMS, medical care.
Okay. And a lot of times people, when they call, they're somewhat in a panic mode, but they are looking for some specific information, right, to get the situation under control.
Right, and actually the operators, the 911 operators are very well trained to work on getting that information. They will need to know the location and finding out the nature of the emergency. You know, is it a medical issue? Is it someone who is not breathing? Is it a fire going on? And then they can figure out which direction they need to head in terms of who they send there, and they will then continue to ask some questions.
So when somebody calls 911, what happens? What happens? What does that generate in the way of action?
So, like I said, the 911 operator then will ask, what's going on, and so we're talking about EMS medical, and the first questions will be, what is your location and what is the nature of your emergency, and then they will ask, is the person breathing, is the person conscious, and that'll sort of, if they're not conscious, if they're not breathing, that's going to result in a higher level response of who goes, as opposed to, well, grandma's been sick for a couple weeks. We'll still get a response, but it just depends on who we send and how many and how quickly.
Normally when you call 911, let's say it's a medical emergency, you'll see an ambulance and a fire unit. Who calls the shots at that point? Who's in control of the situation?
Well, we have what's called a two-tiered system here in Jackson County, or in most of Jackson County. We have what's called a first responder, and that's usually the fire department, and they are a non-transporting unit. They are there. There tend to be more of them around. They will often arrive first on scene, particularly in the further out areas of the county. We then have the ambulance or transporting agencies, and there are 3 of those in the county, and they will be there, and they will actually assume control of the patient, because they're the ones who are going to make the decision about taking the patient to the hospital or not.
Okay.
So first responding is to get there quickest, particularly for somebody who needs something immediately, and then the ambulance is there for additional level of care and transporting the patient to the hospital.
And I think people need to understand that the ambulance services are private, so when they show up, it's not as if it's the fire department showing up.
Well, it actually gets more confusing than that, because we have 3 ambulance. The county is divided up into what's called ambulance service areas, or ASA in the lingo. There's 3 of them. Mercy Flights, which is, you're right, a private company, kind of covers most of the county, the big swath across the middle of it. Ashland Fire and Rescue provides the ambulance service down in the southeast part of the county, and Rogue River Fire Department provides the ambulance service up towards Josephine County, near Grants Pass.
Okay. All right, let's move over to where actually somebody dies in the home, because sometimes that occurs and it's expected or it's not expected. But let's say somebody passes away at the home. What happens then when the emergency services, they call 911, they respond there, and the patient's deceased? What happens?
Well, first of all, it will be determining, is the patient truly dead? Sometimes that's very clear, some that isn't. And so that usually generates a medical response initially. And if the person is dead and there is nothing else to be done, then it gets turned over to law enforcement, which is the medical examiner that has to say, is there anything suspicious about this? And then the patient, a funeral home will be involved in terms of taking care of the body. Now, if a patient is already, death is expected, particularly if someone is in the hospice program, then the first step is actually to call hospice. Okay, and call hospice, and then, because we already know that the patient is going to be dying, and hospice will then proceed, and we typically do not generate a medical response in that time.
So when does a medical examiner get involved when somebody has died?
There's a list, but basically a medical examiner is involved if the death is unexpected, if it's under unusual circumstances, if it's an on-the-job injury, if you're concerned about suicide or a homicide going on, if there are suspicious circumstances, if it's sort of out of the blue with no reason, then they will. And they'll review some records and make that determination on how much further investigation they need to do.
All right, so who can legally pronounce somebody dead?
Medical personnel will do that, and the EMS personnel do have a set of criteria. I think law enforcement can do it as well if there are some things that are fairly obvious. If somebody has rigor mortis, if somebody has been decapitated, cold outside, there's a few circumstances, but typically it is a medical personnel, so it's frequently the EMS folks.
All right, and at that point, if somebody has died in the home, then they normally would not be transported by an ambulance.
No, if they're died at home and resuscitation is not going to be carried out, which is one of the things we sometimes do in certain circumstances, then they're not. If they are going, we have what's a cardiac arrest where we think we can recover somebody, then the ambulance will be involved. But I think we're talking here about the end of life sort of expected ones.
Right. And I realize we have to deal with these things to be straight up about it because it does happen every day. Is it a POLST? What is that?
POLST is a physician orders for life-sustaining treatment, and that's basically, it's a pink salmon-colored piece of paper. Actually, Oregon was one of the first states that designed this POLST program, and it's for folks who aren't necessarily in hospice, but clearly have made decisions on what they want to do or don't want to have done towards the end of their life. So POLST is typically used for somebody who's getting on in the years and often who has some underlying medical conditions, heart disease, lung disease, that they're ongoing, they're not going to be recovered from those diseases, they may be controlled, and this gives some instructions on what to do should somebody die. Okay,
and those usually posted on the refrigerator, so to speak?
Yeah, it's supposed to be somewhere obvious, right?
And that indicates that all these decisions have been made, and here's what you do.
Right, and the part of that is there's a couple different parts of it, but the most important one for EMS personnel at the time of a 911 call is to
resuscitate or not to resuscitate.
Right, to do resuscitation or not. DNR or DNA or do not attempt resuscitation. That's really the most important one, and if EMS arrives and someone has a valid POLST form that says DNR, then they will not institute resuscitation measures. If there is no POLST there, then they automatically will begin resuscitation.
Wow. Okay, and that's the criteria, because I've often wondered who makes that call. Even though they may have an order on that orange form, who makes the call whether to do it or not?
It's the EMS providers, because they're the ones. Again, we talked about in the beginning a 911 call. Somebody either isn't breathing or dead, and they go there, and if there is no POLST form or it says do everything, then they are going to attempt to resuscitate the person and transport them to the hospital as appropriate.
Okay, now you're going to be lecturing this Thursday. What's your topic and what are you going to be dealing with?
Basically what you've talked about here, obviously in more detail than this, but talking about the 911, it's 911 and end of life. When to call, when to not call, also interactions with hospice as well. So, talk about some about the 911 system, a little more details than we have, how it works, how it's set up. The POLST form and how EMS interacts with the POLST form that way. There is also another gentleman, Nick Krabowski, I think is the last name, who's going to talk a little bit more about the funeral. He's been in the funeral industry, and so he's going to talk a little bit about that end of it as well.
Well, let me encourage you, this is a free service. It'll be happening this Thursday at the Smullen Center, which is right across the parking lot from Rogue Valley Medical Center. It's a beautiful facility and venue. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, if that's more convenient for you. If not, then they repeat the entire seminar at 7 o'clock in the evening. And let me encourage you to take advantage of this. This is absolutely a great service. So, Doctor, thanks for coming in. I think it's something we need to talk about. It's part of life. We need to be prepared for these things. And I just want to say in closing, what can you say to somebody who's struggling whether or not they should get involved with hospice? Because I just think I've been too close to realize how wonderful the service is.
Well, I think the thing to do is to consider it early on, not waiting until sort of the very last minutes, but when it's clear that this is kind of
the road you're going to be on.
This is the road's going to be on. Then it's worth talking with your physician, your practitioner, and looking into hospice as an option for additional care.
Okay. Dr. Rostykus, thanks for coming in.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll be right back.